Welcome to The Explainer. Listen, in our hyper-stimulated modern world, we are seeing an absolute crisis when it comes to micromental health, cognitive endurance, and healthy aging. I mean, we're constantly wired, our attention is completely fragmented, and chronic stress has basically wrecked our circadian biology. And because of this, so many of us turn to so-called natural sleep aids, right? We're just desperate to optimize our brain health for deep work and get some daily energy back. But as we're going to uncover today in this elite masterclass of the source material, optimizing your sleep architecture requires a whole lot more than just blindly swallowing a supplement. It requires a really profound understanding of your own neurochemistry.
Okay, let's just rip the Band-Aid off right away and challenge a pretty dangerous modern myth. The assumption that just because a sleep supplement is sold over the counter and labeled natural, it somehow carries zero risk. We kind of have this habit of viewing herbal remedies as a totally harmless first line of defense against poor sleep. A cup of chamomile tea or a viral magnesium mocktail on social media definitely seems easier and safer than starting a prescription medication. But the sources reveal a stark reality here. These natural compounds are powerful biological agents. They are actively altering the neurotransmitter levels in your brain. And just because they come from a plant or a mineral absolutely does not mean they can't cause severe, unintended chemical clashes in your body.
To really grasp the stakes of this misconception, we've got to look back at the tragic 1989 L-tryptophan outbreak. This historical context is just vital. In 1989, a nationwide outbreak of a severe illness sickened over 1,500 people and caused at least 30 deaths in the U.S. The culprit? Contaminated L-tryptophan supplements from one specific manufacturer. The FDA ended up recalling and banning all forms of tryptophan. This proves a really critical point. Dietary supplements just do not have the rigorous, heavily regulated prescription drug testing and quality control. Now, decades later, an alternative called 5-HTP rose up to fill that void. But the underlying regulatory environment? It's largely the same. That means the responsibility for safety falls squarely on us and our understanding of the science.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the neuroscience of sleep, calming the hyperactive brain, serotonin and the gut brain, magnesium, stress and cognition, and finally, the hidden risks of supplements. Every single system influences the other.
All right, Section 1. The neuroscience of sleep, understanding brain mechanisms. Let's get into it.
Look, if we're going to understand how these supplements actually work, we first have to understand the machinery they're operating on. If you've ever had a racing mind at night, you know that terrible feeling of being physically exhausted but neurologically wired? This neurotransmitter right here is your primary target, GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid. It is essentially the brake pedal for your brain. It's the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in your central nervous system. When your GABA receptors get activated, they suppress that hyperarousal, slowing down nerve activity and regulating your entire sleep-wake cycle. For anyone doing demanding cognitive tasks or deep work during the day, increasing GABA at night is the literal physiological mechanism required to transition your brain from those high beta stress waves into a real state of cellular recovery.
Moving right along to Section 2, calming the hyperactive brain.
So how do we actually press that neurological brake pedal? Well, the crucial point is that these natural derivatives aren't magic spells. They are highly specific chemical compounds that directly interact with your brain's architecture. Take apigenin, which you'll find in chamomile, or extracts from the passion flower vine. The science shows these compounds actually bind to the exact same GABA receptors in your brain that hardcore prescription sedatives target. They just do it a bit more gently. They literally force a state of relaxation by lowering stress-related hormones and physically slowing the transmission of excitatory signals across your neural networks. It's fascinating.
Now, to make this super practical for you, let's look at the actual clinical dosages required to suppress that central nervous system hyperarousal. For apigenin, human clinical trials using chamomile extract point to effective dosages of 400 to 560 milligrams daily, often split up or just taken in the evening. For passion flower, the clinical sweet spot ranges from 100 to 750 milligrams, taken about 30 to 60 minutes before you go to bed. And I need to stress this. Taking isolated, high-dose supplements is vastly different from sipping a lightly diluted tea. These clinical amounts are what actually trigger significant neurochemical shifts.
In binding to those GABA receptors translates directly into measurable, real-world outcomes. In randomized clinical trials, adults using passion flower actually fell asleep faster and had far fewer nighttime awakenings. But the most remarkable part? It increased their slow-wave sleep. That's the deepest, most restorative phase of sleep where your physical healing and memory consolidation happen. It also yielded an average of 20 extra minutes of total sleep time. Over the years, that compound interest in recovery is a massive, massive driver for healthy aging and cognitive preservation.
Before we leave the hyperactive brain, we absolutely have to talk about L-theanine.
Found naturally in green tea leaves, this amino acid is a totally unique neuromodulator. It effortlessly crosses the blood-brain barrier and goes right to work elevating not just GABA, but also serotonin and dopamine. At the same time, it lowers excitatory chemicals that are linked to stress and anxiety. But its true superpower for cognitive performance, it's the ability to trigger the release of alpha brainwaves. These waves are associated with a state of wakeful relaxation. That is the exact mental state you need for deep focus, creative problem solving, and smoothly easing your transition into REM sleep.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, Serotonin and the Gut-Brain.
This is where things get really wild. Let's look at the fascinating link between the gut and serotonin. What's amazing here is the dual biological impact of 5-HTP, an amino acid your body uses to produce serotonin. In the brain, 5-HTP converts directly into serotonin, which is then synthesized into melatonin, the hormone that dictates your circadian rhythm and tells your body, hey, it's time to sleep. But modern research reveals it actually doesn't stop there. Down in your gut, 5-HTP supplementation has been shown to actively restructure your microbiome. It increases overall microbial diversity and boosts the bacteria responsible for producing short-chain fatty acids. This is literally the gut-brain axis in action. Optimizing your digestion directly optimizes your sleep neurochemistry.
But here's the catch. When it comes to neurobiology, consistency is everything. A recent 2024 study showed that it took 12 weeks of careful 5-HTP supplementation for older adults to see significant improvements in both their subjective sleep quality and their gut microbiota composition. 12 weeks! This highlights an essential truth about healthy aging. Repairing disrupted circadian rhythms and gut dysbiosis from chronic stress is definitely not an overnight fix. It requires sustained, systemic intervention.
Okay, Section 4, Magnesium, Stress, and Cognition.
If neurotransmitters are the signals, magnesium is the highway infrastructure. It's a critical mineral that acts as the master regulator for over 300 enzymatic reactions in your body, directly governing your stress physiology and sleep architecture. But you have to know which specific tool to use, because not all magnesium is created equal. Magnesium glycinate is highly effective at dampening the HPA axis, which is your body's central stress response system. It helps lower your evening cortisol, making it perfect for physical tension. On the flip side, magnesium L-theanine was specifically developed to cross the blood-brain barrier. It acts on NMDA receptors to calm a neurologically overactive mind, and studies suggest it even supports synaptic density and plasticity in your prefrontal cortex. Basically, threonate is an elite cognitive preserver for those struggling to turn off racing thoughts after a long day of intense deep work. You can see here exactly why a simple magnesium deficiency completely tanks your sleep. It's because it starves 3 primary biological pathways simultaneously. Without enough magnesium, your brain struggles to activate those calming GABA receptors. Your body completely fails to suppress stress-inducing cortisol via the HPA axis, and your pineal gland can't efficiently convert serotonin into sleep-inducing melatonin. It's like a 3-car pileup. You simply cannot out-supplement a fundamental mineral deficiency.
And that brings us to our final and frankly most critical part, Section 5, Hidden Risks of Supplements.
Having explored all these powerful mechanisms, we really need to confront the severe pharmacological dangers, starting with a terrifying physiological reaction called serotonin syndrome. Because supplements like 5-HTP or St. John's wort increase your serotonin levels, combining them with prescription antidepressants, which also increase serotonin, can literally flood your brain with toxic levels of this neurotransmitter. And guys, this isn't just a mild side effect. Serotonin syndrome is a potentially life-threatening condition characterized by a dangerously elevated heart rate, surging blood pressure, heavy sweating, muscle spasms, and severe agitation.
This is exactly where that natural equals safe myth totally crumbles. Take a look. St. John's wort is a well-known inhibitor of enzymes that process medications. Mixing it with statins, blood thinners, or heart meds can completely alter how those drugs work in your body. Taking valerian root, which acts on GABA, right alongside prescription sedatives like benzodiazepines, can severely depress your central nervous system. And taking 5-HTP with an SSRI antidepressant like Zoloft, that creates a direct pathway to the dangerous serotonin syndrome we just talked about.
The danger is very, very real. Just look at this real-world case study documented by Poison Control. A 33-year-old woman who is currently prescribed Zoloft for depression decided to self-medicate her anxiety by taking 7 5-HTP tablets. Because these supplements aren't strictly regulated, there was no standardized, safe dose clearly mandated on the bottle. The very next day, she arrived at the emergency room suffering from tremors, severe agitation, muscle spasms, and even hallucinations. She was suffering from serotonin syndrome, a massive toxic clash in her brain caused entirely by mixing a natural supplement with her prescription drug.
This stark reality highlights exactly why we have to approach these compounds with deep respect. This quote really hits the nail on the head. As the sources remind us, the FDA does not test and regulate dietary supplements with the same rigorous safety protocols required for prescription or even standard over-the-counter medications. You are essentially acting as your own pharmacist here. We have got to treat these compounds not as harmless bedtime teas, but as powerful neurochemical modulators.
So, what's the big takeaway? The foundational truth of human biology is that you literally cannot supplement your way out of poor behavior. You can't erase chronic stress, a toxic diet, or massive digital overload just by taking apigenin or L-theanine. True restorative sleep, the kind that fuels deep work, preserves your cognitive health as you age, and stabilizes your micromental health, requires a holistic approach. It requires combining strict behavioral sleep hygiene with a precise science-backed understanding of how to safely leverage these neurochemical pathways.
So, now that you've got the real science, the actual neurochemistry behind sleep biology, from GABA receptors and the gut-brain axis to the very real dangers of serotonin syndrome, the question is, how will you use this science to master your own nightly recovery? It is time to stop guessing with unregulated pills and start intentionally designing your health. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really encourage you to look closely at your own nightly routines through this new evidence-based lens.